to think of crowdfunding platforms as a great place to raise funds for innovation. However, a big data analysis of 50,000 Kickstarter projects suggests otherwise. Amitava Chattopadhyay, INSEAD Professor of Marketing and study co-author, is with us today to tell us more about it. Amitava, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Could we start by defining innovation from a product perspective?
So innovation from a product perspective has been defined as having two components. Obviously, one component is the novelty or uniqueness of the offer, but the other aspect that's equally important is the usefulness. So a more innovative product would be both more novel and more useful.
The study took a big data approach. Could you tell us more about it?
We looked at approximately 50,000 projects out of a total of 300,000 plus projects that have been posted on Kickstarter since its inception about 8 years ago. We focused on products, and we focused on product categories that accounted for at least 1% of the projects listed on Kickstarter.
You used state-of-the-art machine learning tools to derive a list of descriptors. How did you measure novelty and usefulness?
So first we came up with a list of words that are synonyms for novelty and synonyms for usefulness. And then we used a search algorithm to identify the number of times novelty and its synonyms and usefulness and its synonyms were used in describing the project. To look at the total description, we not only looked at the words that were used in the written description. Videos are also posted on a project website, and so we looked at the audio track of the videos and extracted the number of times that novelty and its synonyms or usefulness and its synonyms were used in the audio track. This then allowed us to create a measure of the frequency of use of novelty and the frequency of use of usefulness. And then we also knew from the Kickstarter website which projects were actually successfully funded and which projects were not successfully funded. We then explored how, to what extent usefulness and novelty were predictive of the probability of success of a given project.
The research team made a startling discovery. What was it?
What was interesting and startling was that if a project was claimed to be both highly novel and highly useful, then the probability of funding actually went down. So there was a negative effect of both novelty claims and usefulness claims being high.
What do you think could be the explanation for this?
But in a typical consumer purchase context, research has shown that high novelty and high usefulness actually leads consumers to be more likely to choose that product. When you make a choice, consumer protection laws eliminate uncertainty. You know that the computer will function the way it is claiming to function, and you're absolutely certain that when you hand over the cash, you will get the product. But in crowdfunding, when you give the money, there is a promise that you will get a product, but it could be that the developers actually in the end fail to be able to come up with the final product, or along the way they realize that exactly what they promised isn't something that they can feasibly achieve, and so the specs change. So there is uncertainty around the final outcome. Both are choice decisions, but one is a choice decision with very low uncertainty, and the other is a choice decision with a very high level of uncertainty. And there's some related research, if we draw on that, which shows that people tend to choose more traditional things when risk levels are high. If we kind of generalize from that, we can say that, well, a novel product is less traditional. And to the degree that we can make that claim, then the higher risk level means that people end up choosing things that are less novel. And so further out on the innovation spectrum, those products don't tend to get funded because of the perceived risk in the decision.
And for the marketers in our audience, what would be the larger lesson here?
If you are in a crowdfunding context, then you need to think about whether you want to focus on novelty or whether you want to focus on usefulness. Now, we did an analysis that was interesting. We looked at the probability of funding a project when novelty or its synonyms are not used at all in the description versus there is at least one mention of it. And we did the same for usefulness. No mention of usefulness or its synonyms versus at least one. And what we find is that there is a 200% increase in the probability of funding if you go from zero use of novelty versus at least one. And there's a 1200% increase in the probability of funding when you go from zero use of usefulness or its synonyms to at least one. So I think where we're going with this is to say that, usefulness seems to have a bigger impact, and that, in a sense, has an intuitive feel to it, because by virtue of the fact that you're trying to do something and raise funds on Kickstarter, in a sense, novelty is guaranteed, and it's far easier to see that there's something novel here. But when you have something novel, the usefulness may be more difficult for people to actually decipher. And so articulating the way in which it is useful may help more than articulating the novelty aspect. And so perhaps I would turn around and say that greater emphasis on usefulness is perhaps the way to go in crowdfunding. I would mention novelty, but I wouldn't mention it repeatedly. I'd kind of go easy on the novelty claim and emphasize the usefulness aspect.
Amitava, thank you so much for joining us at INSEAD Knowledge.
Thank you.